The clips from trailers, movies, and other YouTube videos are for educational use only. Enjoy our video podcast.
Imagine yourself as a project manager, and you're sitting in a conference room prior to your stakeholders and even some of your executive management coming in. You're sitting there thinking to yourself, I have to sell this idea that is going to be beneficial to not only the project, but to my client and to my executive management. But the question you keep pondering in your mind is, how am I going to do that? I have all the evidence. I have all the research done. My team has done a fantastic job in ensuring that I have what I need to be able to present this information, but how am I going to convince the stakeholders and even my executive management in accepting this idea? That, my fellow viewers, is called persuasion. And in definition, persuasion is a process in which one person or entity tries to influence another person or group of people to change their beliefs or behaviors. It is distinct from coercion in that the people receiving the message have a choice about whether to act on it. Now, sometimes we may think, why do I need to persuade this person? They're not going to buy into it anyways. Not necessarily true. It's about the way you go about it. However, persuasion also tends to make project managers very uncomfortable in the first place. It's a lot easier for you to persuade your internal team because everyone's kind of on the same team and on the same page generally. But it's a whole nother subject when people actually have to persuade their client, stakeholders, or even their own executive management. Now, in order for us to say, how are we going to use persuasion as a tool to convince others in changing either their beliefs or behaviors to our own benefit? Well, we're going to look at the movie 12 Angry Men from 1957. So, in 12 Angry Men, the premise of the story is that we are stuck in a jury room with 12 jurors who have to decide the fate of a young man. And in order to do that, they all have to look at the evidence, reevaluate what had happened, what's been discussed, and then make a determination of guilty or not guilty. The thing is, though, one of the jurors was not convinced, and therefore began the whole journey of reevaluating evidence. And in order to do that, this juror used the art of persuasion. Now, in this particular video podcast, we are going to look at 3 particular points in the art of persuasion. The first being that you appeal to the audience's logical reasoning. Second, you respectfully point out flaws with the presented evidence. And 3, appeal to the audience's emotions, including empathy. So our first point in the art of persuasion is we appeal to the audience's logical reasoning. Now, by definition, logical reasoning is a mental activity that aims to arrive at a conclusion in a rigorous way. It happens in the form of inferences and arguments by starting from a set of premises and reasoning to a conclusion supported by these premises. Also, to think about it, logical reasoning is a form of thinking in which premises and relations between premises are used in a rigorous manner to infer conclusions that are entailed or implied by the premises and the relations. And as a project manager, when you want to present something to your client and you want them to understand and see what is going on behind this presentation, what is it exactly you're trying to say, you are going to use that kind of mental activity to be able to have the client start to think, okay, I see what you're saying. What this also does, it allows for us to have productive conversations. So not only are we presenting and saying, here, logically, this is what this is all about, and appealing to the audience's logical reasoning, like saying, hey, if you do XYZ, it just makes your life easier. And then people are like, oh, well, maybe. But sometimes not everyone's going to buy into your presentation or your idea. And therefore, what it does is it creates conversation. It creates a collaborative environment that allows for everyone on the team, including the stakeholders, to have a say, to be able to present their logical thinking and reasoning. And that can be from not just presenting a new idea, but it could be certain topics. It could be discussion points. You could even be presenting risks and issues in any way, shape, or form. And then in 12 Angry Men, we watched the juror who opposed the idea of sending the young boy with a guilty verdict. He went through every single piece of evidence and logically pointed an alternative perspective to each of them. He did that with the knife. He did that with the woman who saw the body, quote unquote, drop to the floor through the train windows, and also with the old man who heard the body hit the floor and then saw the boy run out of the building. And by doing so, he started to appeal to his peers' logical reasoning and seeing how maybe the evidence might be in a way questionable or impossible or even just timing, which leads into, of course, the second point of the art of persuasion. The second point in the art of persuasion is to respectfully point out flaws with the present evidence. Now, you don't need to be a project manager to acknowledge that anything in life made by people or even has the involvement of people can have flaws. And that's okay, by the way. That is the whole beauty of life. There are imperfections and flaws. And that can be in anything from math to science to ethics, even to religion. But here's the thing. Just like how project managers need to be comfortable with persuading their clients, a project manager must also be willing to respectfully point out flaws in the evidence. Take, for example, the FBI virtual case files. If the project manager on that particular project had been honest with the FBI and saying, hey, you haven't provided us reasonable amounts of requirements for us to really say this is how the system's going to look, or given us enough time and instead of playing politics, allowed us to really show you what we could make you instead pressured us and thus leading into all the issues that the FBI virtual case files had. Or even take, for example, the Challenger space shuttle. If the project manager on the Challenger space shuttle project had just looked at NASA in the eye and said, look, the engineers found the evidence. They are proving to you right now that there are problems with the shuttle and it should not go into space. You should not send the shuttle into space. It may potentially cause damage and even irrevocable damage, which it did. So now you're thinking, well, what does this have to do with the 12 Angry Men movie? I thought the 12 Angry Men was the whole center of this. Well, it is. And in that film, we see this demonstration of respectfully pointing out flaws. So, of course, the juror obviously appeals to the logical reasoning of his peers, but then at the same time, while he's appealing to the logical reasoning, he's also respectfully pointing out the flaws in two examples. The first being the knife. So all the jurors around the one that didn't agree were basically saying, oh, well, look at this knife, which was an evidence. And they said, well, this knife is very unique. And even the seller said that he's never seen anything like this before. And therefore, there's just no way that someone else had the same exact knife. The juror who disagreed pulled out of his own pocket the same exact knife and explained to his peers how he went down to the same area where the boy had bought his knife and found the same exact knife at another seller, and basically pointed out the flaw in how there's no way that this boy was the one who potentially did it just because the knife was something he bought a couple days ago where someone else could have bought the same knife at the same time. The other example of how the juror demonstrates respectfully pointing out flaws is with the old man. So the old man had claimed that between the time where the body hit the floor and he saw the young man running out of the building was a total of 15 seconds. Now, the juror who disagreed with the guilty verdict, he said, well, didn't this old man walk a little funny in some way? And the jurors who didn't really think about it, like, oh, yeah, he kind of did walk a little funny. So what they did is they set up a simulation of this old man's apartment to determine how long it really would have taken him to get from his bedroom to the front door. And in doing so, they had discovered that it took the old man 46 seconds, not 15. So it was then thought about logically that the old man maybe heard the body hit the floor and then a while later then assumed that the boy was running out of the building and just happened to not really see him but assumed it was. And as demonstrated, the juror was very respectful to all his peers. Not at any point did he insult their intelligence, which of course would be a huge no-no, especially if you want to persuade someone of a different opinion. And that goes the same for project managers. We have to be comfortable with respectfully pointing out flaws, because if we're not, we're doing our clients a disservice at some point. And thus leads into our third third point of the art of persuasion. The final point in the art of persuasion is to appeal to the audience's emotions, including empathy. By definition, empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within their frame of reference. That is, the capacity to place oneself in another's position. Now, we as project managers, and even non-project managers, have all kinds of events and emotions that we go through that we then carry with us into our next job, project, you name it. And we as project managers not only have to empathize with our internal teams who may have suffered from, poor management of their project, to even the client who may have been, pretty burned by a contractor before, and therefore there may be a lot more trust building that has to be done. Or even with internal team members demonstrating that, yes, these project management processes do work. It has to be done right, making them into believers. And that also happened in 12 Angry Men with the very last juror who was refusing to change his vote from guilty to not guilty. And so this scene was very interesting and amazing to watch, because again, the first two steps were already done, the appealing to the logical reasoning and also pointing out flaws respectfully. And so this last juror had this moment where he at first was angry with his peers for not wanting to put this kid on death row, and then quickly transgressed from that to inner conflict with his own son, who he has not seen in years. And in that moment, he decides to rip the picture of him and his son. But then, just as he did that, he then had a moment where you could see in his face, I wouldn't want this situation to be on my son's shoulders. And he kind of breaks down for a moment and finally changes his vote from guilty to not guilty. Why? Why would he do that? Because he, in that moment, placed his own son in the position of the kid they were determining the fate of. And he realized that if in reality his son was not the perpetrator, as was being discovered throughout the film, he would have hoped that a jury like his would have taken the time to really analyze and answer questions that weren't answered and determine a not guilty vote for him as well. Thank you all for joining me in this video podcast, and I hope to see you in the next.